So you've been playing with acrylic for some time now, but you may be running into some issues. I want to share with you the 5 most common mistakes made when learning how to apply acrylic. I'm going to show you how to fix those mistakes. Let's get started. So in the 30 years I've been teaching, these are just 5 things that I've noticed that most every student comes across, and we troubleshoot along the way during the course. So the first thing I find is we generally use too much primer. And why that's a problem is because if we use too much, it can, over time, appointment after appointment, it can oversaturate the cuticle and the matrix area. So just a quick little thing. The matrix is underneath the cuticle, under the skin. And when you put the primer on, let me show you an example. When you put the primer on and it soaks in, you can't really see it because it's clear. All the products we use pretty much are clear, the prepping products. So there's a prep and there's a prime. The prep is mostly made of alcohol, so it's not too concerning if you get too much on there, but the primer is. So let's pretend this blue alcohol, I'll put that right here, is my primer. This is what it looks like if you put the right amount on. So this is a clear tip that I'm using, and I'm going to say that this part of the tip is the free edge, and the pointy part up here is going to be the cuticle. So when I use my primer, I actually dab off and sort of lay it against the side of the glass to remove the bulk of the primer, okay? So dip it in, and then just go like that a couple of times. And then when you put it around the cuticle, you literally want to just lay it down, and it'll absorb into the cuticle. That really is enough. And you can do that, one dip sometimes, for the whole hand. What I usually do is once I dip in, I start with the thumb because it's the biggest finger, and then work to the other fingers because they're the smaller. I don't start with the pinky because that might be the most saturated nail you're going to do. So start with the thumb. So this is what it looks like if you just gather too much and you put it around the cuticle. See that? And it's just going to saturate too much. You don't want it to bleed in underneath that cuticle, getting into the matrix. So just go easy on the primer.
I noticed that you're not doing this on your own hand, using the little practice tip.
Yes, and I usually do it in my own hand. I like to do that. But if I do this blue, which is, I'm trying to use blue so you can see it, because primer you can't see so much. If I use this blue on my cuticle, it's going to stain the cuticle and it's going to make it look ugly. And I want to do another video and I don't want to have it stained. But good question, cameraman. Because usually I do it on myself. Okay, so number 2 is, this is a big one. I find my students will always do this. They form all of their fingers at once. And I always suggest form one finger at a time. Now, the reason being for that is, here's a form. If I take this form and I form up the fingers, so I can put this form on like this. I'm happy, good form. Then I've got this, I'm just doing different types of forms so you can see the different forms. This is a metal form, so let's say I get that on. They can be a little bit finicky. Actually, forms in general can be a bit finicky. And it takes quite a bit to get it on. And when you get it on there perfectly, this is why you don't want to form all the fingers at once. Especially don't form 2 hands. You don't want to make it so that the client has all the forms on all the fingers, and I'll tell you why. I've just got a bunch of different forms that I like that I'm just throwing on here.
Colorful.
I know. This one is one of my favorites. Look at the color on that. This OPI one's my favorite for a shorter nail, but this is only, it's so beautiful, but it is very effective. Okay, so you get all these forms on. You've taken the time, they're all perfectly put in there. Like I say, forms are quite, well, you got to get your form right. If you don't get your form right, then the whole application is wonky. So let's say they're all on there. You're working on the nail. The client's hands are leaning on the table, right? You're working on this one. The forms can be knocked out of place. Happens all the time. So you're painstaking taking all that effort to form each and every one up so perfectly. Meanwhile, the client is sitting here moving around, or she goes to grab something. When you go grab something, she's knocked the form out of place, and a slight little movement of that form will throw off the whole structure of the nail. So just form one nail at a time as you go. So put this nail on once it's applied, then apply the next one, apply the product, then apply the next form, apply the product, and so on, and so on, and so on. Another common mistake is making your beads too wet, the wrong liquid to powder. Now, that's a tall order, but it is very common to make that error. And you can make that error for a long time until you get it right. It's a tough one. Sometimes you get it right and then you still make them wrong a little bit, but that's okay. That's totally okay. You have to make these 5 common mistakes in order to get to the point where you're like happy. That's totally normal. That is the road to getting this right. I totally embrace making mistakes. So what I want to do is I want to get some monomer. You've got your monomer going. You guys know that. You're doing that. And I'm going to get some powder and I'm going to place him on there. See how it kind of just rolls away on you? The reason why that is common, because we're still getting used to the liquid to powder. It's very hard. It's one of the hardest things to do with acrylic is to regulate your liquid and powder. I can pretty much feel the weight of it in my brush. Once I determine the weight of my brush, I can feel it in there. But that only comes with practice. So what I want to do is, here's where we're trying to go with that. We want to dip our brush into the jar and you sort of, I'm just sliding off. You can see I'm sort of sliding off the edge, or you can tap, whatever ways you want to eliminate. And you just gather your bead and then you can pop your bead there. And if it's standing at attention and just moving ever so slightly, that's the correct bead. But that can take quite some time to get to that point. So sometimes we do a little counting, we hold in here for 1, 2, 3. We tap off a couple of times, and then we lay in here for 1, 2, 3. This is for fast setting product. And then we just lay it on here. Now, one of the ways you can tell is when you lay it down and the bead lets go, and it still sort of stands at attention, that's when you know he's ready. And he's just ready to go, and you can sort of just still mold it enough time to mold it and shape it, and pat it and pull it, wherever you want it to be. That's why I suggest take little beads at first so you can control those beads. And once you start to get the consistency right, that'll take time. Just give yourself some time on that and you can just practice. You can get more tips. This is why I say practice on fake hands first or piece of paper and stuff until you get used to that. Pop it on there. I'm going to put my hand under so you can see it better. See how we sit in there waiting? But let me do one. Again, that doesn't look right. A lot of monomer, little bit of powder, and see how he's kind of spreading out and moving around. And I need to say, whenever you go at it and you're trying to make it work, you need to dab off and get rid of the monomer. Best to sort of maybe take it off and then start again. The repetition of going into your monomer, into your powder, will give you an idea. When you hit it right, you'll be like, oh, that's it. And it's like riding a bike. You'll feel it and you'll know that was the right amount. And then once you feel it, you go in, you lay it on here, and you'll be like, okay, I'm getting a groove for it. And once you get that groove, you'll hopefully remember for next time, but I will tell you, you may get it that day, and then the next day you come and try it again, and you're off a little bit. But that really is the process of learning. It just means you're one step closer to getting it right. But that's one of the hugest secrets, is getting your liquid to powder right. So one of the most common things I find actually with everybody, but it is very common when you're learning, is people will message me and also in the class, they'll say, I get product stuck in my brush. There's 2 questions to that. How do I get it in there? How is that happening? And how do I get it out? When you go in to get your monomer, and then you go in to get your powder, especially if you're working with it too wet, it's normal. When you apply it on here, you're taking it away, but look on your brush. See that product stuck in there? But you don't really notice it because remember, it was over here. And then you start going like this and you're doing your thing, right? The number one thing you want to do when you leave that bead down there is wipe off the excess monomer, product, whatever it is. So now you've got, look at that, So I just wiped it off. I got a nice clean brush. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to shape. I'm going to do what I need to do. And I'm going to clean off again. And I'm going to go in, pat some more. And I'm going to clean off again. It's those times when you're cleaning off and off and off that you're actually cleaning it. If you don't get a chance to do that because you're kind of chasing everywhere, probably because it's a little bit wet, it's because you've got product that's sort of curing in there and you didn't really notice it, and that's totally normal. I find that especially when you're working with white or black color or glitter. Glitter is a huge culprit. So sometimes, and I know some of you aren't going to like this, but sometimes I'll get so much gummy with the glitter in there, I'll actually put it in acetone a little bit, but I make sure I condition it back again in my monomer. So what do you do when you get it stuck in there? Oh, so frustrating, but don't worry about it. So here's one here. I have a brush with some stuck in there. I put it in there so you can see what it looks like. That can happen within just 5 minutes or so. This isn't necessarily an overnight situation. It's just in 5 minutes or so. So what I will do, I'll get it gummy like that. It might be a really good brush and I don't want to ruin it. And maybe I paid some good money for it. So what I will do, I will get a bowl of acetone and I will soak it in the acetone, but just the bristles. I mean, if it's a metal post like this, then certainly you can soak the whole thing in there. But if you have one, most of them all have like that. But when it goes into the wood, just don't soak the wood or any types of plastics into the acetone because it will eat the wood. Okay. So all you need to do that is about 10 minutes or so, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. If it's during your working process, like I say, if there's glitter gumming up in there, I'll put it in acetone. You can do that right within the procedure and it'll just loosen it for you. You can just get it out of there. If it's stubborn, you can take a cuticle stick and you can sort of push it out. You can go like this. You can push it out and get rid of the product. This is a little more stubborn. This has been in here for a bit. So I'm just going to soak those bristles. Now, I know some of you will be taught in school not to use acetone to clean your brush, but I've been doing it for 30 years and acetone is drying to the bristles. I wouldn't want to leave it overnight, but as long as you condition it back into your monomer, it's totally fine because acetone evaporates right off the brush. If you can soak your fingers in it for 30 minutes to get rid of your acrylic, then you're totally fine to soak your brush in it. So I appreciate all those concerns, but it's actually okay to put your bristles in acetone. So I'm going to let that sit there for a few minutes while I show you the next step. Another common mistake, and this makes total sense. I did it too. I did all these things. All these mistakes I'm showing you, I have done. So this is another thing. We will get a bead. And we will place it on the nail, clean the brush. And as we're manipulating and sculpting, we're doing our thing. Once we get it going the way we want. Now, if it's curing up a little bit more than you'd like, sometimes we dip back into the monomer and we go back on like this. It does feel like it's working for you, but we're not really supposed to do that. And I didn't find that out until years later in my career. The reason why we're not supposed to do that is because that bead that you make, that first initial bead, is the correct ratio. So when you place that bead down there, it's all working together with those ratios that you created on here. Adding it after now is going to mess up the time frame of it, the curing process. It's not going to help you. It looks like it might, but it actually doesn't help. It can actually lead to allergies too, because often when you go back in and you bring out the monomer and put it on here, it's going to flood in there because it's not going to mix with the product that you've got on there already. The mixing is already done. That's why it's so important to get the correct ratio down perfectly. That's why I'm not a real big fan of doing a bead and dragging across like this. I'm also not a big fan of tapping. I just prefer to just sit there and let the monomer absorb the product around it all at the same time. That's just more what I prefer to do. And I often get the perfect bead. There we go. Look at that bead. He's just sitting there waiting for me to tell it what to do. Okay, let's check on that brush. Okay, so I had it soaking in acetone for 5 minutes or so. I'm just going to see if it's much, much happier. Look at that, it is. Oh, see, look at that. Can you see that? Oh yeah, look at that. It just nicely comes out. You can really save a brush that way. Now, I will confess there was a few times where I couldn't get it out or I was just too impatient and I literally took a pair of nippers or scissors and I just cut the clump right out. You can still get a lot out of your brush even though you cut it out. There's still some bristles there. I've done that lots. Okay, so now it's been dried out. I got all the product out of it. Now what do? I'm going to put it in the monomer, condition it in the monomer. It's nice and happy. Remember, the acetone is just evaporating out of it. It's drying the bristles, but it's also puffing up the acrylic, getting rid of it. And there we go. I've conditioned it now in the monomer, and that's a happy brush. I saved a brush. Makes me feel good when I save a brush.
So the schools, when they say don't do that, if it's in there, what's going to happen? Is the brush just useless then, right? So
yes. Now, there are brush cleaners that you can use, but I never really found them that effective. So I always use acetone because, again, if we're using acetone and putting our fingers in there and soaking it off, it's good enough for the bristles on the brush, right?
Well, yeah.
I've been doing it for 30 years. I've never ruined a brush from acetone, to be totally honest with you.
Just don't leave it soaking in there like overnight.
I wouldn't leave it overnight because it can really dry out the bristles. Yeah. Plus, it also, the main reason why I wouldn't leave it overnight is because when you are leaving it in a jar, you are bending the tip of the bristles and bending the shape. And that is hard to get it out. It's really tough to get the shape out. So if it's leaning in something like this, you can see the tip being bent. See that? Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
When the tip is being bent like that, that is no shape for a brush. That is not good at all. I wouldn't do that. So those are the 5 most common mistakes I come across when applying acrylic on the nail. But just remember, you guys, if you are having trouble with your product, it's most likely just learning how to use it. The stuff is really designed for us to make it as easy as possible. And if you're just having a little bit of trouble, it's just in the details. You just need some information, and hopefully that will help with the 5 common mistakes. Maybe you've experienced them, and if you haven't, you'll know what to do now when you do. Thanks for joining me. I'll catch you guys in the next video.